Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We often talk about India in pretty broad terms, like it's this huge melting pot of cultures and religions. And while that's true, today we're going beyond those broad strokes. We're going for the specifics, the really fascinating details of religious life as it's actually lived by millions of people in India.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really eye-opening. We're drawing on some truly incredible research from the Pew Research Center. It's a huge survey, really in-depth. They conducted it between late 2019 and early 2020, and they went all out. They used this method called multi-stage cluster sampling, which is basically a way to make sure you're getting a really accurate representation of the population. And get this, they translated the survey into 16 different languages.
Right.
That's commitment to detail.
Yeah, 16 languages. They even had expert advisors to make sure everything was top-notch. It's clear they really wanted to get the nuances right. So that's what we're going to focus on today, those nuances. What are the actual beliefs and practices, and how do they intersect with national identity, cultural identity, all of that? That's what I'm excited to dig into. And one of the things that really struck me right off the bat was just how important religious tolerance is in India.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just like a passive tolerance either. It's seen as this really core value, fundamental to what it means to be Indian, and even, this is the really interesting part, to one's own religious identity.
Okay, say more about that.
So when they ask people across different religions, like Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains, they overwhelmingly said that respecting all religions is super important to being truly Indian. Like, it's a defining characteristic of what it means to be Indian. But they also said it's important to their own religious identity.
So, it's not just a societal expectation, but a personal belief that's really tied to their faith.
Exactly. It's like these two things are inseparable for a lot of people. And this shared value thing goes beyond just tolerance. There are some really fascinating overlaps in specific beliefs, too.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, take the concept of karma, for instance. It's that idea that your actions have consequences, right? You probably know that from Hinduism. But here's the thing. A significant number of Muslims in India, 77% to be exact, also believe in karma. Same percentage as Hindus, which I found really interesting.
Wow, that's a pretty significant overlap. It suggests a deeper level of shared understanding than maybe we often realize.
Right. And it's not just limited to karma either. Another great example is the Ganges River. It holds this incredibly sacred significance for Hindus, of course. 81% of them believe in its purifying power. But you know what? A good chunk of Christians in India, about a third, also share that belief. It shows how cultural and religious influences can intertwine in these unexpected ways.
It makes you wonder about the historical connections there, how these beliefs might have traveled and evolved over time. And speaking of regional influences, the survey touches on Sufism in northern India, right?
Yeah, and that's another really interesting detail. So Sufism is this mystical branch of Islam, and in northern India, you see a notable percentage of Hindus and Sikhs who identify with it, 12% of Hindus and 10% of Sikhs, to be precise. And then, of course, a much larger portion of Muslims, about 37% in that region, also identify with Sufism.
So it suggests a kind of fluidity, a blending of traditions in that part of the country. But there's one shared value that the survey highlights that seems to cut across all of these differences, across all of these regions.
Yeah, and this one's really fundamental. It's the importance of respecting elders. Across the board, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, Jains, they all place huge importance on respecting elders. It's like this bedrock principle that unites them.
So we see these very strong shared values, this emphasis on tolerance, this respect for elders. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because despite all of that, the survey also reveals this very strong sense of distinctness between religious communities.
Yeah, it's kind of this paradox. Tolerance is huge, but so is the sense of difference. For example, the majority of Hindus, like 66% of them, and a similar percentage of Muslims, 64%, say that they see themselves as very different from each other.
So it's not just about respecting other faiths, it's also about recognizing and even maybe emphasizing the differences.
It seems that way. There are a couple of exceptions, like Jains and Sikhs, they tend to feel more of a connection with Hindus. But the general trend is that Hindus and Muslims see themselves as quite distinct.
And this sense of distinctness actually seems to translate into a preference for what the report calls religious segregation. What does that look like in practice?
Well, basically, it means that while people value tolerance and the right of others to practice their faith, they also kind of prefer to keep their own religious communities separate. It's like they want to live together separately.
Okay, that seems kind of contradictory, but I'm curious to hear more about how this plays out.
Well, the survey found that quite a few people across different religions said they wouldn't be okay with having someone from another religion as a neighbor. Like, a notable portion of Hindus said they wouldn't be comfortable with a Muslim or Christian neighbor. And similarly, a lot of Muslims said they wouldn't be comfortable with a Hindu neighbor. It's not everyone, of course, and there are regional variations, but it's a significant trend.
So tolerance, but with boundaries.
It seems that way, and it's not just about physical proximity either. This preference for separation also extends to social circles. Meaning, a lot of people, especially Hindus and Muslims, tend to have most or all of their close friends from within their own religious community. Again, you see some variation. Christians and Buddhists have a little more diversity in their friendships, but the overall picture is one of pretty strong religious segregation, even in personal relationships.
And then, of course, there's the very sensitive issue of interreligious marriage.
Yeah, that's another area where those boundaries are really strong. The rate of interreligious marriage in India is tiny, less than 1%. And it's not just happening by chance. There's active effort to prevent these kinds of marriages. Majorities across Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and Jains, they all say that stopping intercaste and interreligious marriage is a really high priority. Even Buddhists and Christians, though less strongly, still see it as at least somewhat important.
It's clear that these boundaries, these lines between religious communities, they run deep. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about how religion intersects with national identity. The survey had some really interesting findings, specifically about Hindus in this regard.
Oh, yeah, this is fascinating. So, for a lot of Hindus, their religious identity and their national identity are really deeply intertwined. 64% of Hindus say that being Hindu is very important to being truly Indian.
That's a pretty significant majority.
Right. And it's not just about religious affiliation either. Language plays a role too. A lot of Hindus, 59% of them, also say that speaking Hindi is very important to being truly Indian. And get this, for those Hindus who say being Hindu is crucial to being Indian, a full 80% also say that speaking Hindi is very important.
So there's this strong connection between Hinduism, Hindi, and Indian national identity for a lot of Hindus.
Exactly. But it's important to remember there's always variation. Like in the South and Northeast, Hindus tend to put less emphasis on both Hindi and being Hindu as essential for being Indian. So even within Hinduism, there are different ways of understanding what it means to be Indian.
It just highlights the diversity even within these larger religious groups. Now, how do these perspectives on national identity compare to what members of minority religions say?
Well, there's a pretty stark contrast there. Far fewer Muslims, Christians, and Sikhs, somewhere around 20 to 27% of each, say that being Hindu is very important to being truly Indian. So there's definitely a difference in how different religious communities view this connection. However, here's something interesting. A large majority across all religious groups, even those who don't see being Hindu as essential, agree that Indian culture is superior to others. So there's this shared sense of cultural pride that seems to transcend religious differences.
It's like this unifying element, even amidst all the diversity and distinction. Okay, so we've talked about these broad themes, this emphasis on tolerance, but also separation, this connection between religion and national identity. Now, I want to get into really specific stuff, the nitty-gritty details of religious practices and beliefs within each of these major groups. I think that's where things get really interesting and where we can really appreciate the richness and complexity of religious life in India. Shall we start with Muslims?
Sure, let's do it. So one thing that stands out is just how important religion is to most Muslims in India, even more so than for Hindus. 91% of Muslims say religion is very important to them compared to 84% of Hindus. And they tend to feel pretty knowledgeable about their faith, too.
Okay, so high levels of religiosity. What about specific beliefs and practices?
Well, one specific detail that's really interesting is the support for having their own religious courts, or Sharia courts, to deal with family matters like inheritance or divorce. 74% of Muslims are in favor of that.
Which is interesting because, as the report points out, the legal status of those courts is quite complex.
Right. Definitely a topic for another deep dive, maybe. Another specific detail that caught my eye was about the partition of India and Pakistan. 48% of Muslims see that event as having been bad for communal relations, compared to 37% of Hindus. So there's a slightly different perspective there. And when it comes to defining who is Muslim, there's some interesting variation within the community itself. For instance, about a third of Muslims, 34%, say that belief in God isn't strictly necessary to be considered Muslim.
That's a surprisingly high number. It challenges some of the assumptions people might have about Muslim identity. What about outward observable practices? What did the survey reveal about those?
Well, the survey specifically asked about things like wearing skull caps and beards for men, and head coverings and burqas for women. And the numbers are pretty high. 84% of Muslim men wear skull caps, 64% have beards, and for women, 89% wear head coverings, 64% wear burqas. So those practices are pretty prevalent. But here's another interesting detail. Some Muslims also participate in Hindu festivals like Diwali and Holi, around 20% for Diwali and 16% for Holi. So there's this element of cultural exchange and interaction, even amidst the distinctness.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about Hindus. Hinduism is such a vast and diverse religion. What specific details jumped out at you from the survey data?
Yeah, it's really hard to generalize about Hinduism, but the survey does offer some really interesting specifics. Like, for example, a lot of people think of Hinduism as polytheistic, meaning belief in many gods. But the survey found that very few Hindus actually hold that view, only 7% to be exact. The most common view, held by 61% of Hindus, is that there's one god with many manifestations.
Okay, so there's this nuance even within the concept of God. What about specific deities? Do Hindus feel a connection to any particular one?
Yeah, they asked about that too. And Shiva is the most popular, chosen by 40% of Hindus as the deity they feel closest to.
Interesting. What about daily practices? What are some of the things that Hindus do regularly to express their faith?
Well, around 59% say they pray daily, and a similar number, 57%, say they perform puja daily, which is a kind of ritual worship. Having a home altar is also super common, with 85% of Hindu households having one, and 78% invite religious leaders to their homes for rites and ceremonies. The survey also asked about specific practices like using holy basil in the home, which 72% of Hindus do.
We talked earlier about purification in the Ganges. What specific details does the survey give about that practice?
Yeah, so 65% of Hindus say they have sought purification in holy waters like the Ganges. But it's important to note that this practice is much more prevalent in the regions through which the Ganges actually flows. So geography plays a role there.
Makes sense. Anything else about Hindu practices that stand out?
Well, vegetarianism is a big one. 44% of Hindus say they're vegetarian, and another 33% abstain from certain kinds of meat. Again, this varies regionally and is often tied to levels of religiosity and caste. Then, of course, there's the belief in karma, which we talked about earlier. The survey also gives specific percentages for belief in other concepts like moksha, kaivalya, angels, demons, and miracles.
Fascinating. Any contemporary issues that the survey touched on?
Yeah, one specific detail they asked about was the practice of triple talaq among Muslims. A majority of Hindus actually oppose that practice.
Okay, let's move on to Christians in India. What specific insights did the survey provide about their religious lives?
One thing that's really interesting about Christians in India is that they're actually less likely than other major religious groups to say that religion is very important in their lives. Only 76% of them say that.
That's lower than I would have guessed.
Yeah, it is interesting. But despite that, they do have high rates of daily prayer. 77% say they pray daily. Another interesting detail, specifically about demographics, is that there seems to be a net gain for Christianity through conversion. More people are converting to Christianity from Hinduism than are leaving the faith.
Though Christianity is growing in India, at least in part through conversion.
That's what the data suggests. And these converts are mostly concentrated in the South. When it comes to specific beliefs, most Christians in India believe in one God, and a fair number, 32%, also believe in the purifying power of the Ganges. They also have pretty high rates of belief in angels, demons, and miracles. And like some Muslims, some Christians also participate in Hindu festivals like Diwali and Holi. About 31% for Diwali and 25% for Holi. So again, we see that element of cultural exchange.
Okay, what about Sikhs? What specific details did the survey uncover about their religious traditions?
So one thing that's noticeable about Sikhs is that they have lower rates of daily prayer compared to Hindus and Muslims. Only 45% say they pray daily. But one tradition that's really strong among Sikhs is keeping their hair uncut. 76% of Sikhs do this, and 67% say it's very important for children to do it too. This is very closely linked to religious observance and, interestingly, also to caste.
The powerful symbol of their faith. Any other specific practices that stand out?
Yeah, most Sikhs wear a kara, which is a metal bracelet. That's 84%. And 69% of Sikh men wear a turban. Carrying a kirpan, which is that ceremonial dagger, is less common. Only about 29% of Sikh men do that. When it comes to beliefs, the majority of Sikhs believe in one God, but they have lower rates of belief in angels, demons, and miracles compared to some other groups. Another interesting detail is that 74% of Sikh children receive religious instruction outside of the home. So there's a strong emphasis on religious education.
Okay, let's talk about Buddhists. What specific details about their religious lives did the survey reveal?
Buddhists in India are interesting because they show a lower association between prayer and belief in God with their identity, which aligns with some core Buddhist teachings. While the most common belief is in one God, their belief in angels, demons, and miracles is lower compared to other groups. And here's a specific detail that's kind of surprising. A higher percentage of Buddhists, 44% of them, say they worship at religious venues that are not Buddhist sites. So there's this openness to other religious spaces. On the flip side, Buddhists have lower rates of children participating in religious activities compared to other groups.
Interesting. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about Jains. What specific details stand out for you?
Jains are really interesting. They have very high rates of daily prayer and puja. 73% say they pray daily, and 81% say they perform puja daily. Vegetarianism is also hugely important to Jains. A whopping 92% of them say they're vegetarian, and a lot of them even avoid root vegetables. When it comes to beliefs, the most common view among Jains is that there's one God with many manifestations. They also have high rates of belief in karma, the purifying power of the Ganges, moksha, and kaivalya. But, similar to Sikhs and Buddhists, they have lower belief in angels, demons, and miracles. Another specific practice that's notable for Jains is avoiding food prepared with different dietary rules. 72% of them do that.
Right, wow, we've covered a ton of ground here. We've talked about so many specific ideas of religious beliefs and practices across all these different groups. And it's clear that religion in India isn't just this personal thing. It's woven into so many aspects of life, from individual practices to community interactions, even views on governance, right?
Absolutely. This deep dive into the specifics of the survey data really reveals the incredible complexity and nuance of religious life in India. We've seen this interplay of shared values like tolerance and respect for elders with these very distinct, deeply held beliefs and practices that define each community.
And I'm sure some of these details were surprising, even for those of you who thought you knew a lot about India. The shared belief in karma between Hindus and Muslims, the regional variations within Hinduism, the different ways people understand the nature of God, even within the same religion, it's all just so fascinating.
Yeah, it really challenges those simple narratives, those stereotypes that we often have about religion. And it shows that identity is multi-layered. It's not just about religion. It's about culture, region, language, even political views. It's all interconnected.
So as you think about all of these details, all of these specific beliefs and practices, I want you to ask yourself, how does this change your understanding of religious diversity and coexistence? Not just in India, but maybe in the world as a whole. What does it mean for social cohesion, for national identity? These are big questions, and we've only just scratched the surface here. But I hope this deep dive has given you a sense of the incredible richness and complexity of this topic and maybe sparked your curiosity to learn even more.